I recently got the inside scoop from Aaron, one of the co-founders of Illuvium. He explained to me how affinity and class matchups work, along with some details on the hyper mechanic. In this video, I'll show you the most detailed chart to this date, how I calculated it, and how you can use it to prepare yourself for Illuvium. My name is Najaf, and I'm a professional ranger. Like all of you, I crash landed here in Illuvium with nothing. Join me on my journey as I capture and train Illuvials as I battle my way to the top. You're watching Najaf Plays Journey Through Illuvium. Here are a few screenshots from my conversation with Aaron. He's the game designer for Illuvium, so I think he knows what he's talking about. And then we'll get right into the new chart. Okay, so here's my new chart. It's slightly different from the last one I had, but I'm going to approach this video as if you haven't seen my previous one and this is new to you. To start, we're going to look at a couple exchanges between myself and Aaron, one of the co-founders of Illuvium, just to show you where I'm getting this information from. So you can see here what I have highlighted in the yellow, the equation that Aaron gave me, which was pretty much spot on with what I had before. And if you look down here, that equation matches up with what I'm using right here. And then you can see that he says each affinity and class has a strong counter and a weak counter. So the strong counter is worth 2, the weak counter is worth 1. Go a little further, I show him my diagram, and he confirms that the outer ring is the strong counter worth 2, the inner ring is the weak counter worth 1. So that is this chart right here. You can see as you go around the outer edge, air to water, water to earth, earth to fire, fire to nature, nature to air. That has a twofold strength. And then the inner lines, so we're looking water to fire, fire to air, air to earth, and earth to nature, and nature to water, has a one-fold strength. And this diagram over on the left is basically just the diagram on the right, but charted out. So you can see as you walk across, water to water is going to have a 0-fold advantage. To earth, it's going to have a 2-fold advantage. To fire, to 1-fold advantage, and so on. So we go back up to here. And to confirm this a little further, I say, okay, so with my calculations, there are some classes that could have a +8 advantage over another class. Sorry, with my calculations, I can see a +8 advantage over another affinity. But when you take into consideration that there's also classes involved, it's possible to have up to a 16-fold strength over another alluvial. And, right down here, he confirms that. So yeah, you can have a +8 affinity advantage and a +8 class advantage, giving you 16. Now, I will be making another video more on hyper, because there's a lot more to this thread of Aaron explaining how hyper works to me. You can see he says this means that you go hyper much faster. So don't think about these numbers I'm about to show you as a certain percentage of strength. From my understanding, what I'm seeing is that you'll have a meter for hyper, and a 1 advantage will speed up that meter a little bit. So then when you get to a 2 advantage, 8 advantage, or all the way up to a 16 advantage, it just means that the hyper meter will fill up that much quicker. Okay, so let's get into this chart a little bit. Right here, you can see I made a calculator for this. So if I go through here, I can click any one of these. Let's go shock to frost. So shock will have a 2-fold advantage to frost. Again, using the equation that Aaron showed me. So then if we look up here and we go shock and we go across to frost, you'll see right here that there is a +2 advantage. Another quick thing to keep in mind, since my last video on affinities, there's a couple name changes. So if you look through here, we now have tsunami. You can see tsunami to frost would be a -4 advantage, or it would be a 4 disadvantage to frost. Another name change was verdant. This is obviously water and water, so this one replaced maelstrom, and verdant is nature, so it replaced overgrowth. And you can see in this chart, so anything that is blank or has a color just means that there's no advantage either way. And you can see there's a lot of +1s, -1s, +2, -2. But you can see in here, highlighted in green, I have some +5s, +6s, +8s, and also, -5s, -6s, -8s. So you can see that there are some advantages that will, completely dominate if you can get that right matchup. So we can just go through a couple more examples here. This calculator works fine with just the base affinities because you can see it'll work for one base affinity and it'll just calculate a 0 for the other one. So you can go air to, say, spore, and it'll show that, air has a -2 or air has a disadvantage of 2 to spore. And if you want to see something that will completely dominate another one, I believe if you go tsunami over to granite, so you can have the double water, which is tsunami. It's going to have an 8-fold advantage over granite, which is a double earth. Okay. So again, this is the base chart. I have this set up, so it's basically in alphabetical order from top to bottom, from left to right. So this makes it easy to find what you're looking for. So if you're, getting ready for a match, you have a nature, you see they have a shock, you just go across to shock and you can see that there's no advantage either way there. But on this next tab, you'll see how I really separated all this out to give you a much clearer idea of what's going on. Now let's break down this chart a little bit to get a better understanding of what it all means. I think this chart is beautiful, by the way. But in this chart, you can clearly see how I grouped the 20 affinities into 4 different types. If you look on the right side over here, I have a group what I'm calling core, glass as in glass cannon, tank, and really like a filler at the end. The fill is your base affinities. The base affinities are basically just going to be what fills out your board. If you have your 6 alluvials that you really want on the board, but you need 1 extra air affinity to meet the next threshold for the synergy, then that's where you're going to be adding the air. I'm skipping around a little bit here. If you're looking at what I call the glass cannon section, you can see it's basically the doubled up affinities. So Tempest, Granite, Inferno, Verdant, and Tsunami. Those are going to be the ones that are going to have some big advantages and some big disadvantages to where you put it. They'll hit hard if you have them in the right situation, but they'll also be very weak if you have them in the wrong situation. It's nice to see how this chart shows each of these 4 categories matched up against each other in these boxes. So also, we have the tank section. You can see across the tank a range of +2 to -2. There's no big advantage either way for these tankier type of affinity. So these are going to be the types of alluvials that you're probably going to want to have up front, make them more tanky. And then what I have for the core group is really what I think you should be building your teams around. Because these are going to be ones that they hit pretty strong in the right situation. But if you place these more on a back line and very strategically, I think these are the types that are probably going to win or lose you your match. So let's just get into comparing a couple of these groups together. So if you go across where I have the tankier group and we go right to that section, you can see there's barely any advantage either way. A lot that just cancel each other out and a lot of +1s and -1s. So I can see in really high-level matches, you're going to have these types placed up front, but you're also going to be going against somebody else who's putting these types up front. So those alluvials are going to be a lot less likely to reach the threshold of hyper. So again, that's why they're going to be great as a tank. And then if you go over here to the double affinities, so like the Tempest, Granite, these are going to be the ones that could really get hyper very quickly, depending on the right matchup. You get a lot of +8s, -8s, and also take into consideration that all of these are going to have a class involved too. So whereas +8 could be as high as +16. I think if you do get that matchup, it's going to be rare, but a +16 fold, you're probably going to reach hyper very early on. And I don't want to spoil too much for my next video, but another thing with hyper is once you reach that threshold, you have hyper for the rest of the match. You don't lose it. So just a couple more things about deck composition and hyper. Again, these are going to be 2 future videos because this one's already getting pretty long. But you can see, knowing the different categories that I put these in, there's going to be 5 good options for a deck composition. That'll kind of give you an all-around deck. And also just some quick information about hyper. So again, with these numbers, don't think of them as a certain advantage where they hit harder. I don't think they're actually going to hit harder. I think it just means that the higher that number is, or the quicker the hyper meter charges. There'll be a range of -16 to +16 on these matchups. And what that means, if you have a matchup that's negative, that really just means that your opponent is charging hyper faster than you. So if you have a -5 advantage to the opponent, know that your opponent has a 5-fold advantage of charging its hyper meter faster than you. And a couple other things that I learned about hyper was, when you do reach the threshold of hyper, you have increased attack speed, you'll have a new ability, and a new omega. Again, I'm going to touch more on that on my hyper video. So if you want to see videos on these two topics, then make sure you're subscribed, and they'll be coming out fairly soon. Just like I did last time, if I can get 50 likes on this in the first 24 hours, I'll go ahead and I'll post this in the Illuvium Discord so all you guys can use. When it comes to what is the best affinity, I wouldn't be looking at each individual affinity as its own separate thing. I'd look into these 4 categories that I came up with and decide for yourself how you want to approach the game and which of these categories fits your play style. But in my personal opinion, I think each of these affinity groups have their place in your deck and on the battlefield. It's really going to come down to which affinities are used for the Tier 4 and Tier 5 alluvials. We're getting more and more clarity each and every day on the mechanics of Illuvium and how the game is played. I will continue to update my charts and share it all with you. I want to prepare you the best I can for this game. So join me on my journey through Illuvium. Thanks for watching. Make sure you click that subscribe button and check out this video I've highlighted here if you haven't seen it already. I highly recommend it. I'm also on Instagram, posting more content about Illuvium, Fancy Birds, Axie Infinity, and more. So go give that a follow. You can find all these links below, including my Linktree link. If you're interested in Drip or just another way you can support the channel, then use my link to join my downline. Thanks again.